Hey guys, this is miicrow here. I wanted to make a quick video on New World, specifically with Trick reacting to the content that we put out yesterday in terms of how Vigor works, and talk a little bit about Burninator because it's been hit pretty hard with the nerf, and I honestly think it got hit too hard, and this is a fundamental issue with AGS where they tend to nerf two things at the same time that fundamentally change artifacts when they probably should just be doing one at a time, and as such they tend to make artifacts that are OP unusable the next patch, and just overall just creates poor balance. Like the fact that they reduced the potency on Burninator and fixed a bug at the same time doesn't make sense. They should fix the bug, look how strong Burninator is, and then look at if they need to change the potency of the burn effect. But that's an aside. Anyways, let's talk about Trick here. So Trick, as a lot of people might know, is not the only New World streamer left. I would say he's one of maybe 4 to 5 people that can say that they can make content for New World semi to full-time professionally, which is honestly really impressive. Like, it's mind-boggling that someone's able to do that at this point, especially considering Trick, I think, lives in the US. There are maybe 2 content creators with Willie and Trick that live in the US that are able to do this full time, just because the amount that they get paid is not a ton. So massive respect for him for being able to kind of stick through this, create content, keep the game alive to some extent, even though we all know it's kind of slowly dying. It's inevitable death, but when Lord of the Rings comes out, but you know, he's doing a good job keeping the content there, and he overall is a decent OPR player. I would say I respect Trick, like for me personally, I respect Trick a lot more as a content creator than an actual player slash individual himself, but he is very entertaining, and not a lot of people are able to do that and also be half decent at the game. Like compared to what the majority of the player base is, Trick is probably a top 2 to 3% gamer, but I'd say like compared to the player base as a whole, if I were to look at the amount of players today and like rate Trick based off his skill, like he'd probably be a top 500 player, but I wouldn't really say that, like I wouldn't put him like in the top 2, top 50, whatever people would proclaim that he would be in terms of the game skill. And that's just because you have to look at the fact that there's like a lot of different components. You know, you have 1v1s, you have 3v3s, you have OPR, you have war, and I think Trick is like really good in OPR and kind of struggles a little bit more in the other aspects and isn't super flexible. So that's something I would look at there. But just overall good gamer, great content creator, and kind of let's get into this. So yesterday we put out a video talking about Burninator and also talking about Vigor. There are kind of 2 separate issues but tied together in one video, and just before anyone gets too carried away, let's talk about like the big elephant in the room. So for the video I did yesterday, I showed this graph. This graph, or these charts, I guess. These charts are based off of a burn duration of 10 seconds. There's not many things that use a burn duration of 10 seconds, but the reason why I use this is because it makes the math really easy, right? Because when you go from 10 to 9, you know that you're down like 10%, right? It's 10% less. Like it's just a really easy number to use for math. Burninator, if you were to look at it, is actually at 5 seconds. So if you actually wanted to make this graph for Burninator, it would be 5 seconds. And the TLDR of what Trick does is he spends, from what I saw from like when I skimmed it, he spent like maybe half an hour to 45 minutes reverse engineering the math I did, and it tend to align, but you had to take into account that this is all based off of a 5-second starting multiple, not a 10-second starting multiple. So it's like really good that he went through the math and kind of verified things. Like I think at one point he verifies that under this condition where someone has 4 vigor and they have 250 and the dot lasts for 3 seconds. Like he does that, and I could show you guys those clips and like that situation kind of showed the side by side, but this was explained in the video like pretty clearly. I'd say that I'm using 10 seconds because it makes the math easy, and I'm pretty sure he just did not hear that part or didn't comprehend that part, and that's the main reason why we had disagreement, and I think the main reason why it took so long to come to the same conclusion. But with that being said, let's get into it. Solution to Burninator, and I am here to tell you they are full of shit. So Burninator, how this basically works is every single attack that gets applied to you will be putting a dot on you.
Well, it was not working because it was bugged. Vigor is the counter to Burn Potato, but if the bug is not allowing it to make it happen, it's not the Vigor's fault. It's a fucking bug.
Yeah,
You know?
I agree with this. So what he's saying is, when we go back to the tweet basically is saying that every single time you get a Burninator attack applied, it's refreshing everything. So Vigor actually does literally nothing versus the Burninator last patch. That was a bug. There's a separate issue with Vigor that we'll probably get into in a few seconds. It's going to be taken for 10% instead of 15%, and it's going to last for 5 seconds. This dot should like expire after 5 seconds, but there are ways to make it be extended for longer, and there's also no internal cooldown on this dot. So basically, and this is how
there is internal cooldown of 1 second.
So there actually isn't an internal cooldown, and I want to show you guys a cool tool that I like to use for people that don't watch my stuff a lot, called New World Buddy. New World Buddy is basically a data mining site that makes stuff a lot easier / a lot faster. So if you look at the burn effect from Burninator, which I pulled up here, it's called Burnination. It has a tick rate of 1. A tick rate of 1 is different than an activation cooldown. An activation cooldown is what I'm referring to. An activation cooldown is something like Refreshing Move. And the way that this differs in terms of its actual practicality is, say I'm a fire staff and I'm targeting these 2 triangles, pretend that's a triangle because I can't draw, and I hit this area. If I had an activation cooldown, it hits 1 dude. If it's a tick, it hits both dudes. So tick rate is like basically a buffed version of activation cooldown that mostly applies to fire staff. The reason why this matters is that fire staff tends to have a lot of AoE attacks, right? So say I'm targeting like 5 people. All 5 of these people get hit. If there is not a fire staff in here and I'm using something like Blunderbuss with Refreshing Move, only 1 person can get hit in that situation. So that's the main thing that applies. The other spot where it would apply is, like, say I'm using Flamethrower last patch with Burninator. One of the techs is, like, say that this red X is the fire stop player, right? And all these yellow X's are enemy players. You actually could just use Flamethrower, shake your mouse violently back and forth. Like, if you guys ever played Overwatch, some of you may know I was a semi-pro in Overwatch, so I got pretty good at that game. At one point was top 8 in the world. But anyways, you basically, one tech that was used a lot in that game was with Reinhardt. You can swing, like, after you use your swing, you don't keep your camera movement still, right? Like, you could swing and look forward, but you only hit the target in front of you. You swing, and then you drag your camera to the left, and that would take the swing and extend its hitbox to be extremely long compared to the narrow hitbox. The same thing applies to fire staff. You can kind of abuse that in a sense. The tick rate does help with it a bit, but fundamentally the issue with tick rate versus activation cooldown is tick rate can apply to multiple targets. Personally, I think activation cooldown is stupid. The main reason why it was put in place was to make the game perform better for the most part. It also had some balancing things, but I think tick rate's generally a better thing because it allows for AoEs to take place where activation cooldown does not. Both those stack and creates this damage over time meta, which is a lot of people are not enjoying. Trick disagrees with that. It's clearly stated in there in the game file, so I'll kind of skim through that. Also, as a side note, I am unfortunately pretty sick today with IRL medical issues, so I'm trying to get through this because it feels like I need to respond to some extent, but it's like I am in a bit of pain right now. Great way to counter this within the game.
There's so many ways to counter it. There's so many. There's more ways to counter the burn potato than there is to counter any other weapon in the game. I just don't get it. I just don't fucking get it.
This is actually true.
Literally, this fire staff has not only the fire protection counter, but also has vigor countering, and it also has hasted vigor countering it, and it also has Essence of Rise counting it, and it also has cleansing potion countering it. And all of the other things are removed on because people tend to forget the damage reduction and that you cannot have a Lucretius punishment or attunement or empowering fireball because you will more likely go for disdain infliction because it's a dot fire staff. So this fire staff has more ways to be countered than any other weapon in the game.
The weird thing has spawned out of this. Definitely, I would not agree with that last part, but the part in terms of how many things can actually counter fire staff is generally correct. There are probably 5 or 6 ways to counter fire staff. The main gripe I have about Vigor specifically, this and why I argue Vigor is a terrible perk, is that Vigor basically makes it so that trying to counter fire staff by using that perk is not effective, and same thing versus other perks. So I showed this purple line yesterday in terms of how long something versus a typical fire staff build with burning would last, and it was like it would. This is what the case that we're looking at, the Burninator stack, right? That would normally last 5 seconds. So if I'm using something that's supposed to reduce the potency of Burninator in theory by 72%, it is actually reducing it by less than 20%. The fact that there is such a big discrepancy between the 72% and the 20% is the part that I point out that Vigor is useless all the time, and how fire staff is fundamentally broken. And the main reason why I argue that it's fundamentally broken with those perks is that you get these thresholds effectively for free. So this 0.3%, this is coming from 250 int. Every fire staff in the game has over 250 int. If you don't, you're doing something wrong and I can't help you. A lot, I wouldn't say most, a lot of fire staffs that go the Burninator build do run like the burning. And then actually, this doesn't apply to Burninator, but it applies to something else that's very, very similar that I missed yesterday. There's also the Kindle passive, which makes smolder effects last 20% longer. This would add on top of that, and it effectively makes it so that, I mean, this applies to other stuff as well, but Vigor is just, it's not an effective use of a perk to counter fire staff, if that makes sense. So if I use 4 Vigor, so I'd take dedicating 4 perk slots out of my possible 15 for an armor piece, not including artifacts, I'm reducing the potency by a rather minor amount. So it's going from 7.75 seconds if I had nothing to 4.15 seconds. So I'm reducing the dot damage by about half. But there are much more efficient ways to reduce the dot damage by that much. And that just overall makes Vigor a poorly designed perk. The 2 ways that they can go about balancing it is they can buff Vigor with its current form to an extreme amount that's just like borderline stupid, and even then it will consistently have the same issue. Or they could transform Vigor to working off the total duration of the dot and then lessening its value so it's just a more consistent perk, right? So we're at 18% right now. Like, say it didn't just work versus the base duration, say it worked versus the total duration, but it only had 10% or 5% potency or like time reduction versus that. That would be a much more balanced perk. It would be less deceiving for people that don't consistently dig through all the numbers, do all the number crunching and all that stuff. And it's just like, it just fundamentally makes a little bit more sense in my opinion. It's just like the stuff that's like stupid about New World is how much time you have to spend testing random things to actually understand how the game works. Like most of these other games that I've been playing recently, like there's no point of even like making a video about how the game works because it's just intuitive, right? Like that's good game design, is to have a game that's actually intuitive and makes fundamental sense for any person that's playing the game, no matter like how much school they went to, what their background is, like any of that. Like it should just, stuff should make sense. A lot of the stuff in New World just doesn't make sense. Like for example, there's a bug that got introduced when they added cleanse pots to OPR, where if you pop a cleanse pot at the end of the OPR, it lasts for an infinite duration. Like that's like a fundamental issue that like most people would catch, but doesn't get caught. Like I don't know. Like there's just a lot of edge cases that don't get caught, and a lot of fundamental things that just don't make sense with this game, and it's just frustrating. And I think everyone could agree that is probably the most frustrating part about New World right now. Is that in the highest level of wars available at the moment, with that being, I would say, Interstellar and maybe like 1 or 2 other companies that are decent, they've basically all gone back to double tank meta, because the best way to counter this is to run tons of absorption, and tanks give a crap ton of absorption. So people are back to double tank meta, holding right click, and the deaths per war went down from maybe 100 to like 70 to 80 again. So it's just like across the army, like people aren't dying again, even with the heal changes, because they adapted and just got tankier. But let's talk about Burninator specifically in the context of that you don't have an SNS and you're trying to kind of prevent the damage from going, or from kind of coming to you. So I made this graph here. Sorry if you just got flashbang, but I don't know how to make Desmos in dark mode. Where I wanted to kind of show, if you had a dot on you that was lasting for 10 seconds, how different effects would interact with it in New World. We could do it for 5 seconds for Burninator, but I think 10 seconds is a little bit easier to think about, like conceptually, than 5 seconds, just because like. So like right here, I'm calling out that I'm using 10 seconds as an example and not 5 seconds, and then I'm probably gonna go through this and talk about it anyway. But the next 45 minutes, we basically it's just trick ranting about how I'm wrong, when I specifically called, I'm using 10 seconds for the math and not 5 seconds. So what we're probably going to do is we're going to look at the examples that Trick is using. We're going to look at the time that something is lasting, and we're going to compare that to the calculation and see it lines up exactly. So if that's boring to you, I'm sorry, but it seems like something I need to do because that wasn't explicitly obvious yesterday for some reason. It's an easy number to kind of base everything off of. So this, let me get rid of all these colors just so this is a little bit easier to look at first. So this is our dot, right? Our dot is lasting for 10 seconds. It's doing 10%.
It's not. The dot is only lasting for 10 seconds because it's bugged. Because
okay, I'm going to go back like 10 seconds.
This is our dot, right? And for 10 seconds, how different effects would interact with it in New World. We could do it for 5 seconds for Burninator, but I think 10 seconds is a little bit easier to think about, like conceptually, than 5 seconds, just because like.
Do I need to keep playing it again and again, or will people get the point? Like, I don't know. Just listen a little bit, please. Like, if you're gonna rant for like an hour to make content about the video, at least make the content like correct and not just like yell for the sake of yelling. Like, at least try to be like fundamentally like a little bit sound to the argument that was there before. Like, it's just stupid.
It's an easy number to kind of.
Because it's bugged, not because that's the intended.
Because now there's like 500 to 700 people that either A, think I'm an idiot, which is a fine opinion to have. I don't really care if you do or don't. Or B, are just completely misformed. And that's the part I'm like more annoyed about. Like, I don't like it when people are fundamentally wrong about things. Like, this has been an issue I've had with wars in a long time. A lot of people know, but I've probably been considered the best tank in the duration of the game, considering I play at the highest level for the longest time in the game, compared to any other player, and created metas around it accordingly. But I don't know. It's just like, it's just the listening thing. It just bugs me a little bit.
Fucking, it's because it's disdain infliction is bugging it. Holy fuck! Like, what the fuck is going on here?
Disdain infliction wasn't actually bugging Burninator. It was a separate effect, so that's also misinformation. But like, who cares at this point? Disdain infliction appears to be generally working, although I have heard some reports that it's like behaving weird in certain circumstances. Like, people were doing an A/B test between yesterday's patch and today's patch, and because there was a server-side change and not a client-side change, we can't actually data mine a lot of the stuff that occurred, so you actually have to like A/B test everything in game, which is like totally asked to do. But I used to do that when I actually cared about wars a bit more. It's just like, nowadays I could show up to a war after not playing the game in a month and I would still be the best tank on the field. Like, it's partially an ego thing at this point, but it's also just like, people just know that's true, and I don't really know what to say about it. It's just, you learn fundamentals, and fundamentals don't change.
What the fuck is going on with these expert players, bro? Are they all fucking got the retarded flu or something?
Yes, it's called...
What the fuck is going on?
Actually looking at the game we're playing and testing shit so that we can optimize it.
If you were to run max vigor, and there is nothing involved whatsoever.
Turns out if you want to be the best of the best, you have to optimize.
Hold on.
What kind of King Joe going fucking AK-47 is this, boy?
That is sub sound? The hell?
Or like full vigor at like 4 pieces of gear. It would go from 10 seconds to 2.8 seconds.
Yes, that is true. That is true. It goes to 2.8 seconds. 100%. That's the first thing he's gotten right so far.
Which is a lot of damage reduction. You go from taking...
It is a lot of damage reduction. A lot. Remember how I say it's 50 to 70%? This is part of the 70% right here.
100%.
So this is true, like the part I'm going to point out here. So we go from 10%, or we go from 10 seconds to 2.8, right? Like, Vigor, if it actually worked properly, would be like really, really, really strong. That's why I argue that Vigor should be based off the total duration, and then the potency of Vigor should probably be reduced. So if it was 5 to 10%, which we already talked about earlier, but worked versus the total duration, it would make a lot more sense. It'd be a lot easier to balance, and it would be a lot less confusing for everyone playing the game.
Damage rate to 28% damage, which is overall like a lot less damage, right? Like, it should be pretty significant. There is another part of this as well, though, where we are going to be looking at the case where people are going to be consistently getting a buff. We're not going to look at burning first, but we are going to be looking at a stat that comes from the intelligence tree from 250. This increases your dot damage by 30%. The way
Right, but 30%.
that Vigor works is Vigor works against the base duration. It doesn't work versus the extended duration. This is an extension of the dot, so it's not actually like countered by Vigor. So instead of having that blue line, in this case, we'd be at this green line. So we go from the 10 seconds of dot, we're taking 100% damage, to 58% damage. Still pretty effective, but definitely could be better. And then the other case that we just kind of showed a little bit early is if someone is running the burning perk. The burning perk will cause your dots to last 25% longer. This is also an extension, and it's not countered by Vigor. So in this case, we are going to be having a dot with all of our Vigor. It's going to be lasting 8.3 seconds, right? So
No, that's false. That's wrong.
So nothing here has changed since the last example. Another way to rewrite this, I guess, like you could rewrite this to be like 10 times like 0.3 plus 0.25 if you wanted to make it easier from a math standpoint or like to look at. I just like breaking it out like this explicitly. But nothing changed from the last example. You had no problem with the last example. You have a problem with this example. If you're gonna pick a battle, you gotta pick it with the fundamental. Like I've already showed the fundamental, and it also would apply to here, because burning from the nerd side. If you look at burning, which is not a status effect, it's a perk, so I gotta search in the right spot. Burning will equip the global ring burning perk, as they call it in the back end, which basically just means if somebody has a burning effect on it, it lasts 25% longer. It's just if something's not categorized as burning, so like, for example, previous to like a patch or two ago, rune glass was actually not considered to be like fire rune glass wasn't burning for some reason. It was like a separate effect, so burning didn't actually apply to it. Now it actually does, so that's why that matters. Kind of a minor thing, but used for certain builds because rune glass gives ult charge, right? So now burning is a lot more powerful because it will help you get more ult charge in previous patches. Because every single tick of a fire thing will give you ult. Or any other dot for that matter. That's why dots are super powerful.
8 seconds with max vigor. Oh, he's only talking about 4 vigor. He's not talking about Desert Sunrise. He's not talking about
this is true too. So Gene and Desert Sunrise. So Desert Sunrise technically doesn't apply to the full dot, but in practicality applies to the full dot duration. So that's like how I would ideally want Vigor to work, I think, but just, again, reduce the effectiveness of Vigor, so it's actually balanced accordingly. The Ginge Head Wrap is the only effect in the game that works off the total duration. The reason why I say Desert Sunrise doesn't always work off the total duration is there's an edge case where if you have an ability that has an extension within the ability itself. So if I look at like Void Gauntlet, for example, Scream, where it says that the root is extended by 1 second, that 1 second extension won't be reduced by perks that are similar acting to a Desert Sunrise. So there's a Desert Sunrise effect for a CC perk or whatever. It wouldn't actually work. This is like a complete edge case, doesn't really matter for this case, but it's one of the reasons why Void Gauntlet's been so strong in War for such a long period of time, and why you see a lot of Void Gauntlets not using Scream until someone's under 50% HP, because that that 1 second root is like guaranteed unless they have a cleanse up, which most people won't pre-cleanse it and will actively cleanse it, so it's just like a really easy way to waste stamina and get an advantage in a duel.
Talking about 4 vigors, which, by the way, you can still add more than that. I would like to do this test though. I would genuinely like to do this test. You guys want to do the test right now? You guys wanna test it? Does anybody wants to test this?
Forward to the actual test.
If Vigor was total duration, it would be broken.
Yes, it would be broken. That's why you reduce the potency. Okay, I'm gonna actually hop to the total test now because I don't think any of this is really worth arguing at this point because it will be a circular argument. Also, for people that test stuff in game, okay, I guess I got kicked because I was AFK for too long. But if you're gonna test stuff in game, there are so many different variables in New World. It's like really, really complicated. It is infinitely easier to test stuff when you isolate variables. What I mean by isolating variables is basically being completely naked. Take off all your stats. Take off all the perks that are on your tree, and it makes stuff a lot easier to test. If you do stuff with all these variables at the same time, it makes it very difficult to see what's going on and what's going right and what's going wrong, just because New World's code is basically spaghetti, and when all the spaghetti comes together, it's just a fucking mess. Alright, so like when I test stuff, for example, I'm basically naked. So this is like how I would test burning for this patch, right? And, like, see how that like effect would change. I would just have the fire stuff. I'd have basically nothing on, like no int, no perks. And then like one change that you could see is that if I apply a bunch of dot effects, which you can see the Singe applying dot effects because that's the only thing I have in my tree right now, you can see that they don't all expire at the same time. So this is like kind of what they did for the Burninator. With the Burninator last patch, all those dot effects would expire at the same time and they'd just consistently be getting refreshed. Now they have their own individual like timer associated with them. So that's kind of a cool change that went through.
Right,
but again, they shouldn't have.
49. Are you too?
This is also an issue I have with AGS is they did that change, which fundamentally is making Burninator like. I would. This is total guess, not with math. I'm guessing it will be like half as strong with that bug fix alone. And then they're also nerfing the damage on top of that. Like, I think that's too many hoops to jump through right away. You could, like, do that if you had, like, an accurate simulation that I know that they don't have in terms of how their game works and how it would interact. And, like, to be like, hey, we're nerfing Burninator's damage by 70%. We're okay with that. But most people would be like, you know, nerfing it by 70% in one patch is probably a little bit sus. You probably should be doing, like, you know, 50%. And then, like, seeing how the meta reacts and then doing 20%. The main issue is that AGS like doesn't nerf stuff fast, and then they buff stuff even slower than the nerf somehow. So it's just annoying.
49 Guadu. Are you 249 int? Not 250, remember? No, just 249.
So 249 right. Int.
Just hit me with one heavy attack, okay?
So one heavy attack right, should last for 5 seconds.
One heavy attack. By the way, do you have burning on the ring? Before I ask you, you don't have burning on the ring. All right, send it. Heavy.
Also noteworthy, because this is a really annoying thing and why I say to test stuff completely naked. If they were testing this, but like with Singe and they had Kindle on, like the entire test would be invalid. And there's so many times that people test stuff like this, and then they come to me like, miicrow, this is broken. And like before I vet stuff and before I like try to pass it along, I'm like where you like I ask all these questions, I ask for a video, I ask for like screenshots of all these things. The reason why is it's so many variables. Like you do that, your entire test is invalid, and I have to start over. So it's like testing with like all the close on and stuff like this. Like you can do it. I'm pretty sure this person did it right, but it's just extremely risky.
Attack.
Because all your tests can be invalid.
2-1-0.
So this is you see 2-1-0, right? We go back to this. I'm pretty sure Trick has the Vigor on, right? So we go back to this thing. How long should it last? 1.4 seconds. If he has full Vigor, it's going to for some reason, because there might be another variable involved that I'm not aware of, but that's like what we'd expect. In an ideal situation, Vigor is insane, completely broken. It's just that the fact that everyone has these passive bonuses, it makes Vigor like a lot less strong. And it's balanced accordingly, right? Like, that's why the potency of Vigor at this point is so high, because it's not been useful in the past. And I think originally when Vigor came out, it was around 10 to 12%. And it's been buffed and buffed and buffed and buffed and buffed because no one's using it because it's not an effective counter.
All right, go to 250 in now.
All right. So now at 250, we should be seeing three seconds.
You're 250 in. Now let's do a duel. Now hit me with the same heavy attack.
Three seconds. I just spent 20 minutes of my life talking to you guys, and I don't know. This conversation could have been solved within 20 seconds, but yeah. So the math aligns with the in-game tests. The reason why we do math and why we don't do in-game tests all the time is because we did in-game tests to figure out the math. And it turns out it's a lot easier to test stuff, or not easier. It's a lot faster to test stuff by just doing the math than it is to test in game.
3, 2, 1, 0. Oh my god.
See, this is why I respect him as a content creator, though. Like, I would never do this, right? Like, he just made the math, like, so hype. Like, massive respect. Like, to me, it's like, you have to do the math to understand stuff, but it's like, eh.
I'm fucking dead.
Like, that's what it does. And that 3 seconds there, it's like that doesn't seem that strong, and it really isn't that strong. It's just in combination with other bugs is strong, right? So if someone's like using fire staff and there's no activation cooldowns we talked about earlier, it's tick based and we're spreading that to a bunch of different people. You could just passively do more damage with that weapon than other weapons. So like a while ago in New World Wars, we had a meta where it was heavy fire staff, just using flamethrower, walking around and burning everybody. That was like the top damage class as a heavy player. Like, does that make sense? No. This is the same fundamental issue that had at the time. Like, it's just not fair, not balanced for the same reasons.
Also, no, it does affect it. It does affect it by 1 second. It does affect.
So it doubled the duration, right? Like, that's the way to think of, like, we went from 80% to 50% by just hitting 250 int, and everybody's hitting 250 int. A lot of people, this doesn't apply to fire staff per se. This applies to another favorite weapon of the New World community called musket. They have another passive that's from dexterity, right? So it's like 15% duration of dot effects. So it's just like a lot of New World stuff. Like, AGS isn't good at designing shit, right? And because of that, they've just made stuff more and more overtuned over time. And they have created a lot of bonuses and a lot of perks that in a vacuum make zero sense and are just like stat changes. So it's like New World's artifacts are like, ooh, we're going to make something like the new dot that lasts longer. Like, ooh, like about versus like what you see in the test realm where you see like, you know, clear out, send somebody, turn them into a fireball and doing a crap ton of damage to a bunch of other people. Like, I don't know. It's just like another gripe with New Worlds. A lot of stuff is kind of boring. Like there's what? How many artifacts do we have now? I know it's a lot. It doesn't have a counter on here, does it? Well, I think we have like probably close to 70 artifacts now. And I would argue that if we were playing any other game that had an artifact system, so like think like Destiny, a common one for a lot of MMO players nowadays would be Throne and Liberty, which doesn't have artifacts but have weapons that have similar things to artifacts. Like of these 70 artifacts, probably like 20 of them are actually have like unique like game-changing effects, and that's what artifacts should be. They should have unique game-changing effects. Instead, what they become is basically a stat modifier. Like hitting a person with Entomb causes them to be slowed for 10 seconds. It's like that's not interesting. Like it's just like it's such a boring like new thing. Or like Power Stone. Like, ooh, if your health's above 90%, you inflict a passive weaken. It's like great, you just introduced an artifact that is just the best thing for this class by far, and you have to run it or else you're throwing. It's I don't know. Like the way that stuff is balanced in this game is like it's either must run or it's like not usable at all. Like Burninator last patch, complete must run, completely overtuned, completely broken. Burninator this patch, I don't know if it will be as good as a normal fire staff. I don't think it will generally be as good as a normal fire staff. And it's just those fundamental balance issues that are just annoying. But we haven't had a dev believe that it's actually done balance since Dave stepped down, in my opinion. Do I need to look at any of this other stuff, or is this it? I think they're getting burning.
The difference between testing pre and post patch, bro. Why you backpedaling now, bro?
Yeah.
These 2 hours ago.
This test, like this math right here, like this is just with Vigor overall. Like the Vigor hasn't changed in a while. Vigor's behaved the same way since the game's come out. The only thing that's changed is the numbers, right? Like oh, this is also kind of a fun thing to show. Or is it better to show it on here? Probably. A lot of these sites have a scaler. So like when the game came out, it was like 600, right? This wasn't actually 15% when the game came out. I'm pretty sure it was less than that. I'm pretty sure it was like 10 to 12%. So it's just like it just passively got buffed over time. Kind of a fun slider. I don't know.
Patrick, I understand, but the value of the video is still the same, because he's talking about the duration of the dot, which that's not the duration. Why is he talking about 10-second duration? 10-second duration was not the duration of the dot.
Yeah, we already talked about this. I probably should just stop this video at this point, but the 10 seconds is just for math. It's a lot easier to use like 10 or 100 as a start rather than 5, or like a random number like 8. Like what's 20% of 5, right? It's 1, but like you don't think of that right away, versus like what's 20% of 10? Oh, it's 2. Like it's just way easier from a math standpoint to use 10. The really fun one, this doesn't apply to fire staff, but we've been in this kind of meta for a long time. Well, not meta. It's like an OPR thing. Where'd my stuff go? I want to get my... They changed the UI on me a bit. There we are. Attribute bonuses. Well, no, we want to get to the weapon ones. Weapon mastery, no. Oh, it's skill builder now? Okay, so this used to be a little bit different. But for bow, for like poison shot, where this is like a dot, like that, I think poison shot at one point, like they nerfed this a lot, but at one point this was a dot that was lasting for almost 20 seconds per OPR, and it was the most annoying thing to go against. And then the other thing that was really annoying was musket, like musket with powder burn that was also applying a slow that was also tagged to the same dot, so slow and dot effects both extended the duration of it. Like Jesus Christ, that was like probably the most obnoxious thing. And that's still like, those kind of bugs still exist today. So like Void Gauntlet, for example, Disintegrate, that's the Ren passive that's also tied to Disintegrate is extended by Disdain Infliction, because somebody didn't think of that. So that will take your like 30% rend at max stacks and increase it to like something like 35%, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but to support classes basically just makes the perk mandatory. There's just like little things like that they don't think of. But I'm probably not going to keep reacting to this. That's just the high level, was that the math aligns. Vigor is really strong in the vacuum, but when you take into account different things that extend the duration of stuff, being like 150 dex, 250 int, passives on the tree, right? So if we were looking at fire staff passives earlier, the Kindle one that was 20%, you look at burning, like all those combined just kind of create a situation where Vigor's not very good to versus a lot of dot builds. We actually had this like kind of debate maybe 6 months to a year ago with Baboon, Banana, and Eldorian, if you guys were around back then. Baboon Banana is the healer that consistently healed Shroud when he played New World, for reference. He is either the best or the second best healer of all time in New World's history, with Curio being the first, in my opinion. And then Eldorian, obviously been a very successful streamer, has been playing a lot of Deadlock recently, and has just, in general, been like a top 20 pro player in that game. Has just been like popping off. And basically every game he plays, super skilled player. Really good mechanically. And both of them had the same thing. They're like, oh my gosh, Vigor's so good. And then like I showed them the math, and they're like, oh, is that why like my stuff isn't actually getting reduced? And like what this fundamentally comes down to, like this whole Vigor debate, is like when I'm picking out gear, right? Like when I'm picking out armor, and I'm like, do I want Elemental Aversion, which is going to reduce the dot damage, and is going to reduce the normal damage of a fire attack, and a bunch of other abilities? Or do I want Vigor? There's just like almost no situation where Vigor ever makes sense. It's just mathematically better to stack a bunch of Refreshing even, and just like use Tomb on Ice Gauntlet, for example, to get rid of the dots. Or it's better to use Elemental Aversion or Flame Conditioning or like one of those other perks just to reduce the damage that's incoming from Fire Staff overall, rather than like trying to get Vigor to work correctly, because the game's just kind of stacked against you because Vigor's so easy to get. One kind of a different game that does this, I think, a little bit better is Throne and Liberty. Throne and Liberty, a lot of the stuff isn't passive or inherent to your kit. So like Collision, for example, there's a lot of builds that build either Collision Chance or Collision Resistance. The idea is if you have Collision Chance, you could CC people. If you have Collision Resistance, you have passive chance to not get CC'd. Most builds in the game don't have a lot of passive collision resistance or collision chance. So it's like if you want to be anti-collision, you have the ability to run a lot of collision resistance. If you want to be able to collide with a lot of people and be able to like throw people off the map and stuff like that, you need to run a lot of collision chance. So it's just like, that just makes sense, right? Like that's like very intuitive. It's like, okay, if I run more of this, it's better. If I run less of this, if I run more collision, like I'll hit more. If I run less, then I'll hit less. Like that's intuitive. Like this is just not intuitive with Vigor, and that's my biggest gripe with it, and why I think it should be moved to be a total duration perk, and then the potency of Vigor should actually be reduced. And then I think in that state, Vigor's in a spot where it could be competitive, right? Like say Vigor was at 5%, like that would be pretty similar damage reduction to Elemental Aversion when you consider base damage of reducing the effectiveness of Elemental Aversion. Generally, unless it's bugged, which I know like a patch or two ago it was bugged again and they made the wall not do any resistance, which is great. But in the case where it's not bugged, which it's usually not bugged, Elemental Aversion is probably about half its value of the stated perk. So if Vigor was sitting at 5% and Elemental Aversion's at like 2.5%, like it would generally be in a balanced spot. I think they could even push it maybe up to like 7 or 8%, and I think Vigor would still be like in a balanced spot where it's competitive with other perks but isn't necessarily better, and would just be more intuitive and make a lot more sense. But let me know what you guys think about Vigor and about these other perks, or if the game is just like really weird because there's a lot of spaghetti code in the back end, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.